Good evening and welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV, your go-to destination for everything politics, policy and governance. I am Shafi'u Suleiman. Tonight, we dive into the reactions that trailed the presidential directive to release the Arin minors who were said to have allegedly participated in the EndBadGovernance protests as the federal government prosecutors discontinued with the trial. President Tinubu had yesterday directed that the minors who were initially arraigned before a federal high court on alleged 10 counts, including treason, incitement to mutiny, among other criminal charges, to be released, just as he ordered investigation into the circumstances that led to the arrest and prosecution believed to be in contravention of domestic and international laws. While many welcomed the presidential intervention to free the young protesters after raging outrage over their prosecution under dehumanizing conditions, there are also growing calls on the Inspector General of Police, who had taken responsibility for their arrest and detention earlier, to apologize in the face of the inquiry, as others call for their enrollment in schools and, of course, their proper rehabilitation by the government. And as the U.S. presidential election gets underway, to determine the next U.S. presidential president amidst tight race to the White House between the leading contestants, Democrats and Republican candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. We'll be interfacing with the Voice of America White House correspondent Patsy with Kuswara, who is currently with the Kamala Harris campaign, to give us an update on the crucial election. Now, to help us navigate through the domestic political issues, we have joining us via Zoom from Gusau, the Zamfara State capital, Salauddeen Hashim, who is the program director, CLEEN Foundation. Salauddeen, if you're there, good to see you. And in the studio, we have Amsfree Ajanaku, who is the lead fact-checking with the Center for Democracy and Development, the CDD. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And well, while we await the other resource persons to join the conversation, let's start from here. You watch, I'm sure with amazement how this drama unfolded. The arraignment of the 119, minors, largely from Kano and Kaduna. And what happened thereafter? President Tinubu yesterday directed that they should be released. Well, Attorney General of the Federation has followed through, withdrawing the suits and then setting them free and all of that. So what do we call the entire saga?
Yeah, number one is that this is Nigeria at its activist best, across the board. The condemnation of that very, very dehumanizing move by the government. It was unanimous across civil society, across the media. There were editorials. Nigerians rose as one, and this is a signpost to the possibilities of Nigeria. Nobody remembered where those people are from, those minors. Nobody remembered their state. Nobody remembered their ethnicity. And so I would say kudos to all the critical voices in the civic space and in civil society that raised that alarm and raised that moral barometer. Because we are getting to a point in Nigeria where we now think human rights is nothing. Government can just ride roughshod over people's rights. Yes, government can just do things with impunity. But I think I want to begin on that positive note to say that by raising that moral compass and ensuring that the government gets to listen and to understand that what had happened is unacceptable, totally unacceptable. That if you want to even engage the youth who have done anything wrong, you should do it from a point of view of rehabilitation, because they have a future and they are a product of a system that has failed. If those young men, were in school and they were being taken care of course, you will not even have them to accuse them of any offense. But the other dimension of it is that protest in a democracy cannot be criminal, because all of this has to do with the end bad governance protest. And are the people in government telling us bad governance is a good thing? You understand? This is the fundamental question to ask.
Right.
Because the people are protesting against bad governance. What I expect the people in authority to do is to listen to the people and say, okay, we do not have all the answers. You come down from your high horse, and because you are governing for the interest of the people, if, in quotes, you are out there for service. And in the case of our president, he tells us he spent his whole life preparing for this office. Did he prepare for office to offer bad governance? I assume the answer is no. And if the citizens are now saying there are things that are going on, and in that protest, people were basically protesting against the harsh living conditions. We must make no mistake about that. So you cannot beat a child and say the child should not cry.
Right. Okay, I understand Salauddeen has also joined the conversation. Salauddeen, good to see you.
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me.
Salauddeen, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, I can hear you.
Okay, how is Gusau this evening?
Yeah, very well. Windy and dry. Of course, part of the struggle for national development.
Right. Okay. Let me get your initial reaction to the presidential directive, directing that the 119 minors, who were arraigned by the federal prosecutors be released immediately. And what follows suit, they were released and have been reunited with their families and so on. Let me get your initial reaction to that response by the government.
All right. I think it would be nice to begin by saying that what we saw was a complete executive rascality with an attempt to also try to undermine victims of the Nigerian state. Because to be very honest, those children that we have actually targeted and incarcerated for over 90 days are also victims. And then, of course, the only moments they have to express themselves was that protest that presented itself. Having said that, I recall that on the eve of this protest, myself and my very good friend in the studio were seated in this same position. I recall he was seated right there, and I also joined virtually. And one of the concluding statements when you asked was when I mentioned that, look, protest also requires that citizens must understand what their responsibilities were. That we cannot continue to demand for rights and not also have the prism for what citizens' responsibility to the state should be. One of the things that is very fundamental is that there is no state who will sit and fold its arm and see anarchy continue to reign. But the question is, was that the approach that was actually designed by the law to actually approach this sort of situation? The answer is no. All the conventions and protocols and our local laws prohibit the incarceration of minors. The United Nations Convention on Child Rights, even the Nigerian Constitution itself defines what a minor should be. The Child Rights Act is also very clear. The Administration of Criminal Justice Act also prohibits the incarceration of children. So if we have this legal framework, the question therefore remains that the institution of the state itself failed itself for its own inability to deploy its own machineries to process these particular children through the particular criminal justice system that would have been able to adapt to the situation that we have. And the lessons here for me is actually very fundamental, that we need to again revisit and review the entire value chain of our criminal justice. We have a single jacket approach to ensuring certain things are corrected, and this also has exposed the entire state. And of course, for me, is that the reputational damage that this would have on it within the Committee of Nations. So, as it were, you recall that just a few weeks ago, Nigeria purportedly was said to have actually also vied as a committee of United Nations Human Rights Council, which we weren't elected. But again, the federal government came out and said, no, we didn't contest. But whether rightly or wrongly, this also is an opportunity to further dwarf our reputation within the global community. And I think there is a need for an urgent and immediate intervention to remediate this issue and find some kind of a safeguard so that at least there will not be reoccurrence. But what has happened is embarrassing to the state, and I think they should treat it as such.
Right. You talked about, the existing laws, both local and international, and the conventions and other protocols, the human rights laws and all of that. Nigerians are wondering if, those within the criminal justice system, those that facilitated the arrests and the prosecution are oblivious of these facts, or oblivious of these laws. And what happened next? Beyond just releasing the children, they've been made to suffer undue hardship, 3 months incarceration, and all of that. They were malnourished, they were not properly taken care of. It was obvious, some of them collapsed in the courtroom. So what next, beyond just releasing them, even though the president has ordered for an investigation? So what happened to those within the value chain of the criminal justice system, especially the prosecutors, so to speak?
No, but very clearly, you know what the answer to that question is. That, of course, that investigation one will never see the light of the day because, of course, they were actually following the body language of the leader. And then, of course, because they knew they were trying to satisfy some political interest. So my point, simply put, is that was actually administrative. It's actually a political statement for them to investigate, and of course this would never go anywhere. But what I am also thinking is that it is also an opportunity to recalibrate the entire system and find out where gaps were. First of all is that we have a system that also recognizes custodial and non-custodial measure within the criminal justice system. The question remains that why was that option not also explored? That is one. Two is the fact that within this infrastructure of the criminal justice system, there is a Barr facility that is also particularly designated for minors. And in some states, those things are available. In some states, you don't find them. Unfortunately, if you go to most of the Barr facilities, particularly kept for children and minors, they have not been funded and they are not really doing anything around them. So does this provide an opportunity to reflect and go back to those infrastructure and begin to see how we also revitalize them? I can guarantee you that this and also recent happening has further exposed the entire criminal justice actors to their inability to comply with extant laws. The Administration of Criminal Justice Act was very clear that at no time and at no circumstances must you treat minor the way you treat adults. And it also went further to suggest very clearly options and alternatives. And what you will not find in most states is actually the practice direction. The practice direction is what offers prosecutors and even magistrates the kind of focus and how they should treat a specific specific issues like this. But again, I think again we do not have that. There is something they call the national minimum standard within the Administration of Criminal Justice. The national minimum standard is also providing some level of benchmarking to say, look, no matter how bad the system goes, this is the limit at which you cannot go below. Unfortunately, if you go to most states, we don't even fund the implementation of the Administration of Criminal Justice. Only 1 or 2 states, and of course I say this with every sense of responsibility, that has actually provided budgetary allocation to the implementation of the ACJA. And let me tell you something at the national level. The 2024 budget, only 73 million was actually provided for the implementation of ACJA. But of course, we actually provided for 193 million for renovations, which therefore means that there is an economy around our budgeting system. We are not budgeting for efficiency. We are not budgeting for effectiveness. We are not budgeting to improve the system, but we are budgeting in areas where individuals can exploit the system. Accountability is the health of any modern society. Unfortunately, accountability is not pervading, it is not permeating, and it is not influencing what we are doing. And I think it is an opportunity for us to reflect and look again at what we do as a state.
Right. Amsfree, along that line, looking at the submissions, the police, which is the front line, agency prosecuting these minors, initially own up to the responsibility. In fact, depending what they did, saying that there is nothing wrong in prosecuting this, and virtually everyone Nigerian, irrespective of age, whatever, can be prosecuted and so on. In respective of what Salauddeen has talked about in terms of the existing laws, in fact, the top echelon, including the IG himself, speaking through the spokesperson of the police, was even describing the whole thing as a drama being staged, to attract attention and all of that. Some will say, in a saner climate, environment that are developed, someone has to take responsibility. Maybe by now people will be hearing about resignation and so on and so forth, but people are holding on, Just this morning I read the Inspector General of Police is also asking, or rather trying to reprimand, if you like, or investigate some of his team. So who should take responsibility here?
Absolutely. The man who the buck stops at his table should take responsibility. Should take responsibility in terms of, number one, apologize to the country, because like Salauddeen said, what would Nigeria's partners in the international community be thinking about us? I mean, this whole saga was all over the international press. Yeah. It was there on CNN. In fact, the way CNN put the headline was that children, were going to be executed, and of course, that is the penalty for treason.
Treason.
Yes, that's the penalty for treason. So, for those people who put Nigeria in this very embarrassing position, Nigeria is supposed to be the bastion of democracy, if not in the whole of West Africa, at least let's just say West Africa. Yeah. So these kinds of incidents reduce the moral authority of the country. It puts the country in a very, very embarrassing position where other people in the region or on the continent will look at you and say, is this the Nigeria that wants to aspire to UN leadership? Nigeria wants to be in the UN Security Council, and you can so brazenly violate the rights of children, treat children as if they are trash, treat them like they are garbage, and then tomorrow you come and start drumming up support in the international community that people should support you for UN Security Council. So many of these guys don't know that these things have implications.
Right.
These things have implications.
Right.
So if somebody was to even shoot down your bid for any international position, either in the UN Human Rights Council,
can easily pinpoint at some of this.
I mean, the internet is there now, just to take these clips, just to take these links and say, see how you're treating your own citizens. So is this what you want to come and do in the international community?
Right.
So these things we must understand have implications. And it's really good that my colleague, Dr. Salauddeen, really broke it down to in international laws, the minimum standards, and all of that.
Right. Okay, we'll bring in Barrister Kolawole Oluwadare, the Deputy Director with SERAP, who joins us from Lagos. It's good to see you, Barrister. Okay, I think it's an established connection now. Okay, looking at the reactions, and what happened, Mr. President has, did what he's supposed to do, and he's getting the accolades, so to speak, for responding, which is also presidential, but in the event of handing over these children to their respective states, the Vice President was just trying to justify their arrest. He said there are videos, existing videos, and all of that, of this, supposedly, of these children that were uploaded by themselves, in the social media and all of that. These are, according to him, incontrovertible evidences. But then, in spite of all of that, Mr. President, decided on compassionate ground that they should be let go, So what would you make up with this, going forward, around issues around literacy, improving the literacy of the people, understanding the implication of certain things they do? And again, just like Salauddeen has said, it takes two to tango, Government will also not fall its arm and allow anarchy. We've seen what happened, during the protests, arson and all of that, stealing and looting of public properties and so on. How do we reconcile these issues?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll begin from the point of refusing to blame the people on the receiving end of the historic injustices and the bad governance that has been on display. So some of the children you see, without rationalizing and justifying any of the activities they've been involved in that run foul of the law, they are also products of a failed system. Are products of a system that has not provided education. They are products of a system in which their parents are impoverished. They are products of a system in which there's no pathway for social mobility, there's no pathway for social growth. So it does not justify going out there, removing traffic lights and engaging in arson and all of that. Those acts can be addressed. You can still use the justice system to address those acts. One, by putting those guys before a juvenile court. There are juvenile courts in this country. There are juvenile courts that can take care of those things. But when you put a treason charge on them because you want to kill a fly with a sledgehammer, because you want to clamp down hard on protest, on dissent, or any kind of activity that tries to question the corruption going on in government and all of that, then you miss the point. So I would say in that sense that the government missed the point. Now, to the issue of literacy you talked about, I think it's very critical, it's very crucial. And of course, we have perceptions shaping institutions, mind-building institutions of the state, like the National Orientation Agency, for example. This is where it comes in. This is where those citizen-building institutions, like the schools, even the family, actually have a role to play. Has a role to play in this.
Okay, I want to bring in Fatsi with a Kuswa. Fatsi, are you there?
In Howard University in Washington, D.C. Your audio is terrible, by the way. I'm hearing myself feedback, so can you please fix it?
Great. Okay, it's good to see you. Can you bring us up to speed, if you like, with the development right now in the United States, particularly Washington, where you are? How are the electors?
El escenario ya está listo aquí en la Universidad de Howard para la Cámara Harris, las reuniones miembros de la prensa han sido ubicados alrededor de este campo universitario, donde estará acompañada no solamente de los miembros de su campaña.
I'm sorry, I'm hearing something else into my audio. So let me just share with you what's happening right now at the Howard University. This is the Harris headquarters campaign. She is scheduled to come here tonight, later on tonight, depending on how the election results go. I'm still having trouble with audio, and I cannot hear your studio at all, and I'm hearing a lot of echo.
Okay, the things we are getting is that personally, if you like, results. It's not that the two leading candidates, are actually, head-to-head in terms of the outcome so far. One analysis says, even though the build-up to the election has also indicated that they will be highly competitive.
Cámara Harris estará acompañada de su familia, como quien no, quien aterrizará en Virginia a las horas de la tarde antes de trasladarse a este perímetro.
Okay, all right. Patsy, are you there? Okay, I think we're having some challenges, linking up with Patsy, but as soon as she's back, we'll continue on that line. Okay, Salauddeen, looking at the reactions again, a prominent lawyer, senior advocate of Nigeria, Femi Falana, did mention that, it is not enough to just release these children. He cited, provisions of the Constitution in respect to school enrollment. Section 15, so to speak, of the Constitution guaranteed, this basic education for these children. He said the government has to take responsibility of enrolling them in school, otherwise he will institute a case against it. He also talked about, taking care of their welfare and so on and so forth. What do you make up with that statement?
Yeah, I think what I would want to begin by saying is that, to be very honest, before I answer your question, is to actually do some kind of concept clarification around the entire issue. And I think, again, because there is nothing that happens in this country without necessarily absolving it of politicization. I saw what happened during that protest as a very deep arena where political instruments were also deployed. So politicization of protest, sometimes for me, is an issue that we also need to deal with. And the political class must also know that what they have simply done is that in an attempt to either put the regime in power in bad light or try to satisfy some political interest, that it is actually the image of the country that they were actually undermining. And this also is an offshoot of the commercialization that we have seen with various rallies and protests across the country, where people are paid heavily to mobilize. And that protest was massively also mobilized in that particular regard. And then, of course, that was actually one of the reasons why a lot of young children, because of the economy around those mobilization, also came there. I was actually trapped for 9 hours on the road between Abuja and Kaduna that day, because I flew out of Lagos at 6:30 a.m. I got to Abuja at about 9:30, and then, of course, headed to Kaduna, and I was there between 9:30 to 5:30 in the evening before the military intervention came. So for me, again, I witnessed firsthand how the entire thing played out and how young people and children confronted me, and of course were going to attack the vehicle, and of course created a very serious gridlock around it. And to be very honest, I noticed some level of very high level mobilization around it, because I was right there in the front. Now, the issue of education. Look, we all know that justiciability is where the problem really lies. There is no way we can hold the state to account for their inability and some level of policy somersault. Policy somersault in this country has become very consistent with every administration. And sometimes, again, when you hear the conversation that borders around how much of progress we have made around education, you ask yourself, okay, so what exactly does this translate into? Free education is just free speech, because of course when you get to the various schools, you will realize that there are hidden charges and hidden fees that you need to pay. Unfortunately, the development of regional government before now, and most of these governments who are seated today, were beneficiaries of free education across board, and of course a functional system that also threw them up, provided the infrastructure, gave them adequate personnel, education was well remunerated, and then of course there was regional competition where even the southwest, the southeast, and of course the north were providing healthy competition in terms of education, and this actually bettered the people that were there at that time. University of Ibadan Teaching Hospital became the medical tourism for people who came all the way from Saudi Arabia, from different parts of the world, and that is why up to today, unfortunately, that particular place still becomes one of the real hub for medical science. But again, because we did not progress and we did not advance in terms of technology and re-equipping and of course providing all the infrastructure for laboratory and learning, then of course the entire issue has collapsed. Now, what is my point? My point here is that there seems to be some kind of organized and deliberate effort by the state institutions to undermine certain infrastructure that creates active citizenship. Because again, the more you educate the minds of every citizen, the more difficult it becomes to mobilize these people for political interest, to mobilize them for rallies, to brainwash them for election malpractices, to brainwash them for this kind of protest, because people can ask questions and demand certain answers, and where you cannot do so, they simply walk away. So illiteracy has been weaponized. So it is actually the weapon in the hand of the elite to continue to use that against citizens for the sake of instances like this. I dare say that what we saw for those 10 days, yes, the system is actually balkanized. But I tell you one thing, Nigerians are actually one of the most resilient set of individuals that we have seen globally. Because no matter how terrible it becomes, Nigerians will always navigate, they will always adapt, they will adopt means of ensuring their own livelihood and sustainability. But unfortunately, we are seeing the reverse, which therefore means that there are actually some level of interest behind the entire carnage. And the political class must learn that it is not about their own interest, but the corporate image of the country.
Right. Here is some fundamental issues around weaponization of illiteracy. So, we are talking about this at the same time. People are also talking about weaponization of poverty and all of that. If you look at the children, if you like, those arrested and prosecuted, you certainly agree that they are from poor families, so to speak. We haven't seen any of the rich men children among them, or any of the elite children among them. Yes, they said a hungry man is an angry man. Maybe hunger is a driving factor, but fundamentally, basic literacy or education, some would say, would address some of these concerns we're talking about. For instance, for someone raising a flag, a foreign flag, during protests, or asking the military to intervene, these are things that were used, so to speak, by the state authorities and all of that. The police and all of that. If you look at the charges, they are along this line, and that's why they are coming up with this treason and all of that. So if there is some level of education among the citizens, the parents will understand, the children will also understand the implication of some of these things that are happening. So to what extent do you think this weaponization of illiteracy, is affecting, if you like, or has become a trigger to all of these challenges we're talking about?
Yes, that's a very important factor, or that's a trend we have seen across this the EndBadGovernance protest.
Yeah.
But we must make no mistake about one fact. I do not want our viewers to go away with the impression that the EndBadGovernance protest was just a protest that was carried on by illiterate, people who didn't know their left from their right, and maybe as a result of that they got arrested. The reality is that we had in other parts of the country where protesters were peaceful. In Abuja here, protesters were peaceful. Did we see protesters waving Russian flags in Abuja? But they got arrested. So in the end, what the fact tells you is that there's a current climate, which is the climate of the shrinking civic space. The civic space is shrinking. The government does not want to brook any form of debate. It does not want to entertain any form of dissent. And so there is a unilateral clampdown.
When you mention that, it reminds me of the current proposal around youth conference or so.
Exactly.
Nigerians are, very quick to forget certain things. Some pronouncements are made, some policy pronouncements are made, but nobody cares.
Exactly. So I want our viewers to get that clear and make no mistake about that. So it was not just, in certain parts of the country you had
violence.
You had violence. But was it the case across the board? Because the government will use that to argue that protests had been hijacked by criminals, and then it will clamp down on even genuine citizens that want to.
In some cases, the government is also accused of, instigating some of those things in order to cramp down.
Exactly. Yeah. So that point has to be made. Now to the point around that same weaponization of illiteracy, of poverty, and all the ills that we are seeing in our society. I think and I believe strongly that, like my colleague Salauddeen said, the resilience of Nigerians, that we have not even seen the repercussion of that weaponization as much as we should see. Because
that the level of resilience.
Exactly, the resilience level, the family system. We don't have social security. So if a young boy like some of those boys that, if he were to be hungry, we see them every day in Abuja. You are driving past, they come to your window asking you for food, wanting to clean your glass and everything. So we have a resilience or a social system that has allowed the abdication of responsibility by the governing actors. And I'm not just reducing this to just the federal level. At the state level, at the local government level, what's happening there? What's the citizen engagement matrix like? So if these things are not there and you just completely abandon your citizens, let them fend for themselves, let them pick up any ideology. You mentioned the Russian flag. What has the government itself done in terms of countering the disinformation that these young people are exposed to? You think young men waving Russian flags in Kano, they just woke up one morning and started waving flags? There is an information campaign that has gone into that process. And
so the government also need to counter.
Exactly.
With clear cuts and, of course, patriotic also.
Exactly.
Messages.
So the government, like what we are doing in CDD, on our own, we put up fact-checking initiatives, trying to educate citizens to let them know not everything you see on social media is correct. There are narratives that are being, in fact, there is a dimension now, and this has a national security dimension, which is the foreign information manipulation and interference. Foreign information manipulation and interference means that a foreign power can sit down and look at your citizens and say, let's target them with certain amounts or certain quantum of information. And when they get this information, we want them to act in certain ways.
Even the Russian flags were attributed to some of those postulations,
Exactly.
There could be some sort of,
I will give you one example.
Conspiracy and all of that.
I will give one example that is currently going on now. You see, following the coups in Niger, Mali, and
Sahelian states,
and the Sahelian states, what you see on social media now are videos that are valorizing and glorifying military rule. So you have those videos saying since the military took over in those countries have become El Dorado. And then your citizens are receiving this information, internalizing this information. What next do you think will happen? The next thing you start hearing is military should take over in Nigeria. And it's already happening.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Salauddeen, talking about countering these narratives and all of that. And of course, looking at also the bigger responsibility. Amsfree has talked about the shrinking civic space. But this development, the outrage that greeted this prosecution of these minors appears to have ignited the fact that the media, the civil space, the civil society, and all other critical stakeholders are alive to their responsibilities. Just like Amsfree has said, across board, unanimously, Nigerians, condemned that action and then held government to account. Now, how do we deepen this conversation beyond this 119 children that have been, prosecuted or so, or released? We're talking about 20 million children that are roaming the streets. How do we expand the conversation around the need to move these children off the street and ensure that the government do the needful and provide the basic education that they require to also contribute as citizens of this country?
All right, I think Amsfree is actually a very big author of some of these fact-checking initiative, and of course, how we can put some new narratives out there to help us stabilize our democratic tenets. Democracy is actually not progressing, and that is a fact. And because it is not progressing, we need to also constantly reflect. And sometimes I wonder what they discuss at the Federal Executive Council meeting. I think that Federal Council meeting has become just an opportunity to award contracts, which also in itself is illegal because the law clearly says that the BPP should actually have a procurement council, and that it is the procurement council that actually has those mandates. But what we see at FEC most of the time is where people sit down, drink tea, and then of course award contract. At the end of the day, they come and announce how many billions of naira that goes into a particular project, and the project you end up not seeing. So my point is simple, that civic space is actually very fundamental. It is fundamental to the extent that the state itself is actually disposing itself to also deal with it. I'll give you one example. There's one ugly development that is actually happening lately, and that is actually some of the massive importation of dual surveillance infrastructure into the country, which is also suggesting that there is also some level of tracking of citizens' activities. And the reason why it is dual surveillance infrastructure for monitoring is that a number of the times government is beginning to see that there is a credibility challenge with some of its policies. So to reduce and continue to contain and clamp down, then they must have to actually bring in some infrastructure digitally that will help them to quickly track and then of course counter some of those information. And I think that the state really doesn't need that if you are very credible. What they need now is to actually use those kind of digital infrastructure to fight insecurity, which is actually the biggest challenge that we have now. If you're able to do that and also bring into book all the top leaders of militia groups that we have, I think the country would be stable, and then of course we can actually deal with the fundamentals. And now to the issue of civic space. Look, civil society and the media cannot take over the role of the state. It is still the state that provides the enabling environment for civic space to thrive. What we can do is to continue to agitate, continue to engage, and continue to raise some voices around the need to expand the space. But government itself has that particular powers to continue to see whether you want to create a healthier space or you want to continue to shrink it. But I can tell you one thing for free, that the issue of shrinking civic space has actually been consistently on a decline, because again, a number of state assets are particularly being deployed to actually continue to contain. I mean, I noticed you were going to bring in SERAP. Unfortunately, they are not here. Lately, we saw how SERAP also became became a little bit of tasted some of the state aggression. That shouldn't be the case in a democratic setting. Democratic infrastructure suggests that we must continue to nurse and promote a healthier democratic culture, which means there will be participation, there will be inclusion, there will be freedom and liberties for people to express themselves without fear of being incarcerated. But unfortunately, what we see on a regular is a case where if you have freedom of speech, it is not guaranteed after you have spoken, because again, you are not too sure what is going to happen. That isn't what kind of democracy that we are actually preaching. We are actually preaching where citizens can support government to become better. That is why the definition was very clear. It is actually something that both systems must actually nurse to work it out. But finally, again, for me, is that again, let us not also forget that to build active citizenship, we must learn to educate them and let them understand the place of patriotism. And for me, again, the change of the national anthem, I think the state is also not harnessing the essence for the change of the anthem. If you listen to the wordings of the change of the anthem, it particularly resonates with me, even though I don't like the fact that they changed it because I don't see its immediate value. But if what you are doing is to reorientate citizens, then you must provide some symbol. We want to bequeath a country where the banner is actually not stained by these human rights violations, by the blood of innocent citizens, by the blood that you are just trapped in the geographical location called Nigeria should not make you a victim. And that for me is a concern that I think we need to continue to project.
Right. Talking about creating the enabling environment, it's becoming, a thing of concern to many Nigerians, seeing how authorities, who ought to provide this enabling environment sometimes become a threat, even to democracy itself, by shrinking the space, by disallowing people to ventilate, and so on, or by becoming rigid. When there are policy options that are being implemented and Nigerians say no, think around it. Think along this line. Let's do it this way. Or there's public outcry as to, okay, there's need to do something. You find out that, people in authority would hold on to what they, as if, the governance is for them and not for the people. Recently, people are talking about the need to, the control, there has been conversation around the implementation of subsidy removal, for instance. And then the government, through the Minister of Finance, said, these policies have come to stay, like no going back and things like that. We're talking about creating an enabling environment for enhanced engagement, citizens' engagement.
Yes, so that's a clear case of having a pseudo-democracy or a democracy that does not have the full complement of Democrats. Because a democratic system and a system that has a full complement of people who have the democratic orientation would say, oh, a vast majority of citizens, and the data shows that, do not like this policy. So where do we sit down with them to iron out, because democracy is also about compromise.
Yeah, there should be a point of convergence.
Exactly. So there will be shifts here and there, and then you reach a middle ground, because you may not have everything you want, but based on argument, superior argument, and also the fact that you are listening to the people.
Alternative suggestions.
Exactly. Yeah. Then you'll be able to make a headway. But when you have a fixated, kind of mindset, a mindset that does not brook any other, you have this superior mindset, it does not allow for democratic accountability. And I keep saying it. This president is chairman of ECOWAS. He's projecting the image of champion of democracy across the region of ECOWAS and even across the African continent. Does he want to just be a champion of democracy in just mere rhetoric or mere expression? He should be ready to back up that toga of champion of democracy with commensurate action. And I think I need to also make this
very quickly.
Very quickly. Make this very important point around the fact that when we talk about the shrinking civic space, the president can lead the way. He can simply declare that we know that, you know, things have not gone the way it should be. Now there's going to be a bill of rights. We're going to respect these rights. We're going to respect the rights of children. You know, connecting it to what has just happened. We're going to respect the rights of activists, of journalists. We're not going to detain journalists arbitrarily. Just a statement will be a good starting point to show that he is not going to run a government that dictates and does not brook opposition or contrary views.
There should be a commitment, you know, a practical commitment from the leaders themselves. They need to show the way. Thank you very much, Amsfree Ajanaku, for talking to us. Amsfree Ajanaku is the lead fact-checking Center for Democracy and Development, CDD. We also appreciate you, Dr. Salauddeen Hashim, Program Director, CLEEN Foundation, talking to us all the way from Gusau, the Zamfara State Capital. Thank you very much for being a part of the show. All right. And on behalf of the technical crew, this is where we draw the curtain on this conversation tonight. My name is Shafi'u Suleiman. Thanking you for watching.